Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you so much for this wonderful day when we can remember the glorious resurrection, your glorious resurrection, following the perfect sacrifice that you gave for us on the cross. We pray that you always help us to keep that in mind. We pray that you will give us opportunities to share that message with others, and that we'll always keep it at the forefront of our minds and hearts. Bless us today, in Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to talk about falling down. Now, I want to give you some cautionary words in advance. I'm trying to, because it is a holiday, I am trying to keep this at a reasonable time. I have, as I'm like other Apple users, I get this report each week about how much screen time I'm averaging, and it's way too much. There is a lot going on. I've talked to a number of people that do these type of updates, and everybody says it's just there's so much going on that we really can't. Not sure why that came on, but it's really, really difficult to keep up. So I'm going to try to truncate this a little bit today and talk about a few topics. I do have a couple of long videos that I think are instructive on some of the issues. So I'm going to look at some cultural things, a little bit on AI, and then sort of the wars, rumors of wars, particularly focusing on Israel, Middle East, and a potential war in the North. There is a lot going on in that space, and I have a very good video that I want to share with you. So if I cut short some other things, just know that it's because I want to share that video with you. Again, we talk about these different topics: acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. Now, I'm not going to share a lot of scripture with you at the outset today. I do think that we need to keep in mind these things that are happening in Israel, because I think that's the important timepiece that we need to look at. The gathering of nations against Israel, the isolation of Israel, and also the gathering of nations against Jerusalem, and centering particularly not just on Jerusalem, but on the Temple Mount of Jerusalem. And there's some other, there's many, many other issues that I could talk about, but they do seem to be increasingly related. So again, this is a little graphic somebody sent to me about convergence. So let me skip over some of these things that I usually do, and we will jump right in. But remember that this talk here that, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all surrounding peoples when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And we also have this operative passage in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. And I know that's somewhat controversial in some people's minds. It's not controversial in my mind. I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. And I do think that that relates to how people and the nations treat Israel. This is key to God. God has a jealousy for Zion. And we need to keep that in mind, and that all of these things are going to wrap up. So we have a cup that causes reeling. And we know that Jerusalem is going to be key in these end times. So I'm going to talk about just a few things here. So this is an article from the Sociable talking about AI and the Internet of Bodies may lead to the Internet of Brains by 2050. Now that comes from a RAND Corporation report. You can see the front page of that here, cultural and technological change in the future information environment. Everybody is talking about this convergence, bodies, brains, linking everything together, AI. It's impossible for me to even begin to scratch the surface in all these, but look at this quote. This is from the report, And one of the things it talks about here in the RAND report, was just published a week or so ago, human augmentation, key characteristics of future trends. And look at what this quote says. Assessments of the extent and scope of technological applications for enhancing human cognitive and physical capabilities in the GAN timeframe vary significantly. While some experts predict the tactical improvement of human capabilities, others have explored the potential emergence of transhumanism within the 2050 timeframe. This concept describes a new form of human, a transhuman, where information and communication technologies and biomedicine will fundamentally improve the human condition and greatly enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological capacities. Transhumanism implies the adoption of considerably advanced technologies by 2050, including brain-to-brain communication and genetic enhancement, and thus depends on the resolving of various scientific and engineering barriers currently characterizing the field. I think this is moving along much more quickly than people think. I've read a number of articles in the past couple of weeks about genetic enhancement. And one of the problems they have in genetic enhancement is they have figured out, in some respects, how to alter certain human genes. The problem that they have is that the human genes that they alter are so linked to other genes that they're causing damage when they do that. Of course, that's led them to stop doing that, right? Because they're causing damage. No, they continue to move forward at a very rapid pace. So I think you need to pay attention to these things in AI. It's changing things in, as it says, in biomedicine and technology, in warfare, development of weapon systems, and that sort of thing. It's moving very, very quickly. Now, there are some, I personally do not subscribe to this, but I kind of keep an open mind on people's conclusions as to who the Antichrist might be. And you may not have noticed, but there's a lot of people speculating about this. And I think righteous speculation is okay. And one person that has received some notoriety in this area is King Charles. Now, a lot of people say, well, he's not good looking enough, he's not charismatic enough. I think one thing you need to do is be careful with those jumping to that conclusion, because as I understand it, this person will be possessed by Satan himself. And when that happens, all bets are off. Maybe it's not someone who's that attractive. But I'm not saying that it's King Charles either. And others have made that conclusion, and go listen to them and they make their case. That's fine. But some of the times I look at these people who are thrown out there as possibilities, and I'm thinking, like, if it would be easy to say, well, that person's never going to be the Antichrist, except when you start looking at what they're doing a lot of things that you would expect the Antichrist to do. So one of the things that King Charles came up with was a sustainable markets initiative. And the initial concept of that, or the way they promoted that, was through a thing called Terra Carta. Now, I've been to England, I've been to the British Library, great place to go. In the same room, you could see one of the original copies of the King James Bible, things like the original works or papers of some of the papers of the Beatles and Monty Python and the Magna Carta, all in the same general area, which seems to me to be very British, because it's kind of dry humor that here's the Magna Carta, and here's the Monty Python, Michael Palin's papers from my Monty Python. So, but what you see, though, is you saw King Charles in his development of this sustainable markets initiative drew on the Magna Carta and called it Terra Carta, like the Earth Charter. That speaks volumes about where he thinks this will go. Now, of course, he ties it to the environment, and we've played clips of him speaking at Davos and, COP, one of the COP meetings. I think the one in Glasgow is a famous clip, and I'm not going to go into that today. But he recently, within the last couple of months, came out with an addition to Terra Carta. Now, if you were trying to make the case for him being the Antichrist, he didn't want that. He didn't want you to come to that conclusion. Maybe he would back off of this, right? So what did he do? Well, the new organization is called Astra Carta, to care for the infinite wonders of the universe. And and you see the crown there. You see this, and we're going to take over space. Look at what this says. Recognizing the growing role of the private sector in space activity and exploration, the Astra Carta offers an ambitious roadmap for the private sector to lead the acceleration of sustainable practices across global space-related industries. It also recognizes the unique role that space can play in creating a more sustainable future on Earth, and the need for the stakeholders to consider environmental and sustainable impacts beyond our planet. Its ambitions encourage a focus on placing sustainability at the center of space activity. And so you can see that there's a it's not an Earth-centered control the Earth environment thing. It's now launched into space. And so the question then becomes, if he doesn't want people to think he's the Antichrist, then stop acting like it and stop doing this stuff. You know, the unique role that space can play in creating a more sustainable future on Earth and environmental and sustainable impacts beyond our planet. That sounds to me kind of ambitious. Don't you agree? So, but understand that when Jesus warned us about these things in Matthew chapter 24, the one thing he warned most about was deception, and that there would be many antichrists. So certainly I would put this in that category. And again, it's one of these things where it's kind of hard to wrap our head around it, but he's not the only one who's doing stuff like this. There are many of them that think they can control everything, reshape humans, reshape environment, reshape the brain. And that's where we go. Now, you may not have realized, you may have thought that this would be Resurrection Sunday, but it's actually more than that. Now, I want to make one caveat, and everybody's upset about this, and rightly so. But understand that this is the fourth March 31st since Biden took over in 2021. So March 31st, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024 have all been deemed the Transgender Day of Visibility. It happens that Resurrection Sunday, and I use that term intentionally, and by the way, I don't think this is where the Christian and Jewish calendars diverge this year on Passover and first fruits and that type of thing. That's really, it was on those Jewish feasts where Christ was the perfect sacrifice for us and rose from the dead. Those are going to come up in a few weeks, but most of Christendom celebrates it today. But I think that the proper time is coming. So a proclamation on Transgender Day of Visibility. And by the way, it's not just the United States government. Here's the proclamation that was issued by Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York. Sunday marks both Easter and the Transgender Day of Visibility, Politico says. Cue the culture war. So I want to look at a few things that he said, Biden said in his thing. And everybody says, well, maybe he didn't know it was Resurrection Sunday. They kind of got by him. And maybe it did, who knows what he's following these days. It was kind of creepy to see him, Obama, and Clinton together at a big fundraiser at Radio City Music Hall in New York the other night. I call it the Biden administration for a reason, but everybody says, well, he didn't do it on purpose. But look at the logo at the top of the whitehouse.gov page where this proclamation is posted, and you see this. They clearly knew what they were doing. Now, you could say, well, they've done it 3 years in a row, and this year they just continued on the same date. But everybody's upset about it. Trump came out and made some comments about it. So look at some of these things that it talks about. And this proclamation encapsulates a lot of the potential problems that we see, particularly when you have restrictions on speech. I see videos of FBI showing up at people's doors because they've posted something negative about Biden. And all of this is being done to intimidate people and to chill speech. And I have a little bit more about that in just a moment. But listen to this. So it says extremists are proposing hundreds of hateful laws that target and terrify transgender kids and their families, silencing teachers, banning books, and even threatening parents, doctors, and nurses with prison for helping parents get care for their children. I'm telling you, folks, this is, in my view, the epitome of evil, narcissistic, satanic, demonic behavior. Amen. This thing is a juggernaut in our culture and world. They are destroying people's lives, and they don't care a bit. And it should trouble us that the medical establishment and the government and schools and teachers seem to all be in on it together. Not seem to be, are in on it together. Look at this. These attack our most basic American values: the freedom to be yourself, the freedom to make your own healthcare decisions, and even the right to raise your own child. Now, do you understand how upside down and backwards this is? They are taking children away from parents who don't go along, and then they get up there and say, we're just trying to help you raise your children. They want to raise your children in a particular way, with a particular ideology that is completely opposed to traditional Western Judeo-Christian values. The freedom to be yourself, the freedom to make your own healthcare decisions, and even the right to raise your own child. So they're doing the opposite. So we live in an opposite world. So when they say this, you need to understand, they're trying to do the opposite. They're accusing you of doing what they're doing. This is their modus operandi. It is no surprise that the bullying and discrimination that transgender Americans face is worsening our nation's mental health crisis, leading half of transgender youth to consider suicide in the past year. I don't have the statistics at hand, but I'm pretty confident in saying that is a bold-faced lie. And if it is happening, research shows that it's the people who are going through these transitions. Johns Hopkins did a study on it. Peter or Paul McHugh, who was the psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins, where they did the first transgender surgery back in the 60s, I believe it was. They studied it and they found that the people who had gone through with actual physical transitioning to a new sex, what they think is a new sex, they're playing the game of pretend on a different level, were 19 times more likely to attempt suicide. And this liar in the White House and his staff to say that it's the other way around. This is just crazy. At the same time, an epidemic of violence against transgender women and girls, especially women and girls of color, continues to take too many lives. Let me be clear. All of these attacks are un-American and must end. No one should have to be brave just to be themselves. My administration is working to stop the bullying and harassment of transgender children and their families. What about the girls in NCAA locker rooms where males are coming in? So I'm going to play just a short clip. This is, I think it's Jennifer Bilkin, I think is her name. This is on Bannon's War Room. And by the way, she's Jewish, she's not a Christian, and she has long been a person of the left. And she's looking at this. Well, just listen to what she has to say in this brief clip.
Now I want to bring on an incredible investigative reporter, Jennifer Billick, who is amazing on transgenderism and also transhumanism. You've got a piece out or an interview where you say a handful of billionaires are really in back of this transgender movement. This article, and I want Grace and Mo to put it out everywhere in the chat room. Tell me what because this has kind of been my theory of the case, but you're the first one that actually has the knowledge to walk people through it. What do you mean by that, ma'am?
It's more than a handful, but it's definitely this whole agenda, the gender industry, promoting dissociation from sex reality as progressive. This is an industry now in opening up our biology for marketing purposes. You know, it goes hand in hand with all the new technologies that are growing exponentially, nanotech, biotech, AI, reproductive technologies. So, you know, people think they're looking at a human rights movement because this is what they've been told over and over and over and over again for a decade, which is how long I've been researching this issue. And there's no human rights movement here. There's no ground up grassroots movement for some marginalized population. In fact, it's total hokum. I mean, the whole thing is corporate hokum. There are no transgender people. There are people that have their reproductive technology medically and technologically assaulted, and it doesn't change them. What it's doing is changing society and what we believe.
Hold, Jennifer. Whoa, Jennifer, hang on. hang on. I thought this said there's no transgender movement. I thought, no, but it's so shocking. I want to make sure because this audience, this is a central to the assault on our culture and society. I just want to go back. I thought there was this whole movement that started as part of the bullying and everything that came out, that there was all this issues with identification, and you had a real a nexus out there of these people, and this was a human right, and they were being tormented, they were being tortured, they were being oppressed. It was leading to suicides. It was all this, and the traditional way of looking at things was the problem. The patriarchy, the hierarchy we have, the way that it's so rigid that we look at gender and sex, and that was the problem. You're telling us now that you have been doing this for 10 years. You're telling us that's all hokum?
Absolutely. All of it. Every single little bit of it is all illusion. Gender rights are actually rights for people who want to disown reality. So you have to ask the right questions. Why are people who want to disown their reality, biological reality, being given special rights? I mean, that doesn't really make any sense. And why is society being rearranged for them when they're like 0.03% of the population? That's absolute madness. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. But so I follow the money, and there's enormous capital going into this to drive this ideology through our institutions, all of our institutions. The 100 most, the highest revenue law firms are like the 100 top law firms internationally, all have a platform, an LGBT platform. The ACLU is being given millions and millions of dollars to drive the narrative that sex is not real. All of our human rights organizations, our medical institutions, our educational institutions, this is all right through all of them. The idea that this ideology that sex is not real, sexual dimorphism is not real, that sex exists on a spectrum. So like science, and, nature, for hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution somehow got this wrong. And now suddenly there are all of these
But hang on a second. We just had the whole first hour turned over to this terrorism attack in Moscow, what's happening on the southern border. We had intel experts in here talking about it. And Kash Patel, who's a senior guy at DNI, said today on the website, I think of DNI, on the day when he had this ISIS attack, hundreds of people are dead, we don't know what's going to happen in the United States, is they're saying it's so great because the CIA's had their first transgender agent, and that this shows tremendous progress in our intelligence community and going to make us more effective to protect the American people through intelligence because we now have transgender people that are spies. What say you?
You might as well just say unicorn people. They do not exist. They're people that deny their sex reality. And this is like a virtual reality being constructed for us, that there is another subgroup of humanity that doesn't fit into the borders of our sex species. They are somehow special, unique, fabulous.
And what she said was true. That goes on for 20 minutes. You can go to warroom.org on Rumble or BN's War Room on Rumble and get that whole video. I think it was published March 23rd, in the show on March 23rd. And she's right. This is just insanity. But we have the White House promoting it on Resurrection Sunday. And I don't think that that's a mistake. That was done intentionally. But she goes on to say in that interview that this ties in with transhumanism that I brought up, that all these corporations are pushing through AI, Neuralink, enhanced humans, whatever. It's all interconnected. It's all interconnected on a level that I don't think we really understand. And once you start unpacking it, you can go down rabbit trails for hours just developing and getting more evidence about what's going on. It's very troubling. But look at part of what's happening. And part of this is there's a big hearing in the Supreme Court this week about an abortion pill. There's controversy over in vitro fertilization. And I think there are some Christian ethical questions there that need to be talked about in the context of a biblical Christian worldview. But that's for another time. And that I think the Supreme Court had a hearing this week, and I think they're going to approve the distribution of that pill. Do you think John Roberts is going to help you? You would hope that maybe Amy Coney Barrett would, but I'm not sure. The only people who look like they're hanging in there are Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito and Gorsuch. So if that decision comes out, I expect it to be 6-3 or 5-4. But look at these things that are happening, because now, and I've talked about this for years, we're running, human populations are starting to decline. Now, some people think that's great. This is what we've wanted forever. But nobody's thought through the implications. So the people who want population decline, they think, oh, this is great. This is what we've wanted. Everything will be great. Will it? So look at this. Births in Italy declined to historic low. Data lays bare the challenge of reversing falling fertility rates despite pronatal policies. And it talks about this is the lowest number of births they've had in Italy in 2023. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has been trying to reverse the rapid aging of the Italian population. And there's a place in here where it says the birth... here it is. In the data released yesterday, the statistical agency said Italy's total fertility rate, the average number of children per woman, fell to 1.2 in 2023, down from 1.24 the previous year and close to the all-time low of 1.19 recorded in 1995. China has this, Japan, all over Europe and the West. Only immigration has kept the United States above replacement rate. In some countries, Japan is losing people like in the next, I want to say 10 or 20 years, assuming the Lord doesn't return. The population in Japan will be halved. And people talk about China, they say, oh, no, they'll turn it around. Listen, first of all, this problem has never happened in human history. And it seems to be happening now. It seems like we're running out of things. We're having problems with things and goods and services, and we're running out of people all at the same time. And that has huge geopolitical ramifications, particularly when we look at it in the light of the geopolitical world that Bible prophecy describes. Here's another one. This is from the editorial about the problem in the Financial Times just the other day. The most common number of children a British or American woman has by her mid-30s is now 0. Process that. So I see these videos on YouTube and everything where they've got, 6 boys, and then they have a 7th one is finally a girl. The big families are going away. They're few and far between. Okay, so now the other thing that's going on is this frightening chill on speech. And there is, and I hesitate to say this because there are people who listen who don't like the former president, who's running for president again. And there are things, trust me, there are things he does that they make me grind, not grit my teeth, grind my teeth. And there were a couple of them this week, and you can look them up. But there's a thing going on with him with Lawfare and those who support him. That's it. So what happens is if you say, well, I'm upset with what they're doing to Trump, it's, oh, you support everything. No, I don't support everything about Trump, but I'm concerned about the implications of what they're doing with Trump and what it means for Christians and people that don't follow the day of visibility narrative. And so in New York, they brought a case against Trump. They said, you committed fraud. You overvalued your properties. One of those properties was Mar-a-Lago. The judge found this ridiculous excuse for a judge. It's always nice to kind of be at the end of your legal career because you can say these things and you sort of have a little bit of immunity from what they might do. And by the way, in that video where Ms. Billick said that the top 100 law firms, okay, so I was in a law firm that was in the top 200. We, before I separated from the firm a couple years ago, had sponsored a seminar held at the Ohio State House in the Rotunda, standing room only, and I don't remember the title. It was like LGBTQ, transgenders, drag queens, and the law, which included a Supreme Court Chief Justice who ran as a Republican speaking in favor of this. And I was bothered by that the law firm that I work for would do that. I am telling you, it's everywhere in the big law firms. What you said is 100% true. So now let's go back to Trump and Lawfare. So they said, well, you misvalued Mar-a-Lago. Now, that's a very unique property. It's hard to determine exactly what its value is, but he applied for a loan from the bank using Mar-a-Lago as collateral. The banks have, what's the saying? They have their big boy pants on, and they can go out and they can make a determination as to whether what is said in the loan application is true, and they'll make a loan based on what they think the value is. And the interesting thing is, all of these loans that the New York Attorney General, who somehow is worth millions and millions of dollars, despite having lived on a public servant's salary for some time. I'm not sure I understand that, but maybe she's just lucky in the way she invests her money. But all those loans were paid back. And the banks said at trial, we would loan again. So what did the judge do? He said, well, Mar-a-Lago's worth $18 million. Well, it sits on land that borders on both the ocean and the intracoastal. And like a vacant lot next door has been valued at $200 million without a building. And the judge said he fraudulently inflated the value of that. It was only worth $18 million. It's a complete sham what's going on. Whether you like Trump or not, if you're a business person in New York, and they're fleeing, they're leaving New York in droves because of this. So then they came in and they said, well, they put in a judgment of about $450 million against him. He had to get an appeal bond, and they were going to start selling the properties. Here's just an attorney talking on CNN about selling off these properties. And listen to what she says, and then apply it to the Trump case, which is what she's talking about.
You need at least 30 days to get any of these properties sold. But the property that you alluded to, Mar-a-Lago, potentially that could be something that could be sold quickly. I think the valuation is something in the hundreds of millions, and I think there could be a buyer for something like that.
And that would be literally, if you're talking about doing that between now and Monday, that's picking up the phone, calling someone, and then literally writing a check.
Yeah, I mean, there could be plenty of international people who want to buy that property. I mean, there's properties that are priced at 150 and 200 million that are nearby that. And Palm Beach is like the NVIDIA, of real estate. It's just shot up like a rocket. And people do want to live there. They've moved there. So I think that would be the best case scenario as to property. If he's trying to sell quickly, I would encourage that.
So, all right, now that's 240 million estimated. I mean, who knows? You know, he's a desperate seller. In this case, someone picks up the phone and makes that call this week. So I don't know what it'd be. That's still half of what it would be.
And the judge said, no, it's only worth 18 million. And so the New York Times was reporting on this the other day, and the judge was so great. The judge was so bold and smart and just tremendous in what he did in holding Trump liable. And what did the New York Times say? Well, it's kind of hard to determine what the value of these real estate properties are. Oh, but the judge said 18 million, and nobody in their mind, with any kind of a mind, rational mind, which would exclude this judge, is would think that it's only worth 18 million. It's just complete nonsense. When I was in Scotland, I was down by Trump Turnberry, and you can't get a tea time there. and it costs $600 a round, and everything is booked all summer long. He's making some money off of that. Do the math. And his Trump Doral property, it's worth probably way more than $305 million. I'm just telling you, this is just insanity. But one of the other things that they've done is they've gone after John Eastman. John Eastman was one of Trump's lawyers in the challenges that took place after 2020. I can't say too much about it, but this week, Eastman, one of the arguments that Eastman made was based on an act that was enacted back in the late 1800s called the Electoral Vote Count Act, about how electoral votes should be handled. Eastman made an argument based on the language of that act that certain procedures needed to be followed. Everybody rejected that. Was brought up on charges at the California bar. He's a constitutional expert. He clerked for Justice Thomas. He was the dean of Chapman University Law School, and he's one of the leading constitutional scholars in the history of the United States. And so he made an argument based on the statute, and they said, well, no, we reject that argument, therefore you should be disbarred. By the way, the act was changed. Do you know this? In a funding bill, they changed the act after Eastman made the argument to get around his argument. You can't do that. It's ex post facto, whatever you want to call it. It's a complete sham and fraud. And now John Eastman the order was you have 3 days to appeal this or you will lose your law license. The hearing went on for like 100 days. And there were a whole bunch of issues. To show you how much of a sham this is, if you remember recently, there was a case, the people on the left and Democrats decided, well, we're going to apply this section of the 14th Amendment to Donald Trump for insurrection. Remember that? And so they went through court cases making that argument. Some courts upheld it, even at the state Supreme Court level. That went up to the Supreme Court, and our Supreme Court voted 9-0. Here's my assessment of the opinion. They said, that's nonsense. Go home and fight in the election. You can't do this. Our Supreme Court 9-0. Now, are all those lawyers who advanced that argument at all those courts and prosecutors and attorneys general and everything and state election officials, are they going to be disbarred? That's a rhetorical question. Rhetorical question is one to which the answer is obvious. No, of course not. But do it on the other side. And so part of this is to chill people so that if there are challenges that need to be made in the future, these big law firms, the ones that support the day of visibility, they won't let their lawyers get involved in this. It's to chill lawyers from representing certain parties. This is what they do in places like Cuba and Venezuela. It's third world stuff. And as Mike Lee, who works with the Article 3 project, says, this is republic-ending stuff. And he's right, it is. So I'll talk about this. This will come up in a moment. Cyber attacks on GPS could put lives at risk. And by the way, in Lebanon right now, there are concerns that commercial aircraft coming in are having trouble with their GPS. But I'm seeing this in places all over the world. And there's concern that it's being hacked by certain malign state actors or private hacking organizations. And we saw something this week that might have been a cyber attack. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But this is what it says in the Jerusalem Post article. Last week, Over 1,500 aircraft experienced alarming navigation disturbances linked to ongoing global positioning system. The GPS disruptions, intelligence sources suggest that these disruptions likely intentionally caused or connected to the Russians since they occurred near their military bases. But it's also occurring in Lebanon. And Israel is a master at this. They know how to cloak their aircraft. Sometimes that's jamming signals, but sometimes commercial aircraft get caught up in that. And this is what's going on in the world. And there was this is an article in the Wall Street Journal, a giant cyber attack on the MGM Grand Hotel Casino in Las Vegas. So how does this relate to anything in Bible prophecy? So last week, I believe I mentioned, sometimes people contact me and say, you need to talk about this. And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, well, if you go to about 15 minutes in last Sunday, I talked about that. And I resist the temptation to see, I can tell now that you haven't listened to last Sunday's update, but sometimes they say that, and I have to go back to see if I talked about it because I don't even remember. So I don't expect everybody to remember what I talk about. Because I don't. But so I think I mentioned last week that the U.S. had proposed a resolution at the Security Council about a ceasefire, return of hostages. Hamas is responsible for the war. That was vetoed by China and Russia. And then last Monday, a resolution 2728 was introduced at the UN that said called for an immediate ceasefire, mentioned nothing about Hamas responsibility, return the hostages. I think Russia proposed that they wanted it to be an unlimited ceasefire, but that amendment was rejected, and so it passed, but this was what the problem was, and here's the vote. These are the headlines. UN urges ceasefire in Gaza as U.S.-Israel rift grows. Vote widens rift with Israel, because here's what happened at the vote.
254. Please raise their hand.
In support of the resolution, there are 15 members. I'll save you the time to try to count that. There are 14 raising their hands in favor of the resolution, but it's a UN Security Council, so the UN, the U.S. has a veto right. Who votes against?
Abstention.
Oh, the U.S. abstained. And so it passed. And listen to how
the result of the voting is as follows. 14 votes in favor, 0 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2728, 2024.
Russia, China, the UK voting for that, 1 abstention. So here's just a little clip. This will start out in Hebrew. Alan Dershowitz, who's a man of the left, talked a little bit about what does this vote mean. There we go.
בראיון שקיימנו אותו מוקדם יותר,
ככה הוא עוד לא דיבר.
עוד לא שמענו. Professor Alan Dershowitz. Hello, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Good morning. Hello.
Were you surprised by the U.S. decision not to veto the resolution yesterday?
It's a terrible decision. It encourages Hamas to not accept any kind of reasonable offer of a deal for hostages and ceasefire. It gives Hamas everything it wants without demanding realistically anything in return. It will lengthen the war. It will make it more difficult for Israel. It is a terrible decision for America. It's a terrible decision for Israel, and it will drive a great many Jewish Democrats like me away from voting for the Biden administration.
But the question is, in your view, does the friction between these two leaders, between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, does it stem from personal differences, or are there really substantial policy disagreements at the heart of the matter?
This is not a difference between Biden and Netanyahu. This is a difference between Biden and the people of Israel. The people of Israel, although they're deeply divided about Netanyahu, are not divided about the issue of Rafah, about the issue of defeating Hamas, about the issue of getting the hostages back. So Biden has turned against Israel, not against Netanyahu, against Israel. And that's why in this election, more than any election. I've been voting Democrat, for example, since 1960 for John Kennedy. This is the first election I have ever considered not voting for a Democrat. I find it very hard today to vote for Kamala Harris and to vote for Joe Biden, both of whom I know and like personally. So this is not about personalities. This is about the survival of Israel.
And so that was in the morning or afternoon on Monday, and then 1:30 a.m. Here is a video of this boat in Baltimore Harbor. And you'll see here it strikes the stanchion. They had power outage, that type of thing. And everybody's got an opinion as to what happened. And here it strikes the stanchion and the whole bridge comes down. And that's a big bridge, by the way. That ship is probably close to 18 stories tall. It weighs a lot. And so here's Baltimore Harbor, Francis Scott Key Bridge. Very symbolic, very important to East Coast transportation, as is the Baltimore Harbor. And the bridge is down. The ship is still there. There was a lot of damage to the bridge. I could go on. I mean, this was the big story of the week. Here's what it looks like. The bridge came down, did severe damage to the front of the bridge. The ship crushed some of those giant shipping containers that are on there. And I forget how many shipping containers can be put on that particular ship. It's huge. For example, here's a New York Times analysis comparing very large forces. So a fully loaded 18-wheeler colliding with a bridge at 80 miles per hour is 1 million newtons in energy. Okay, force required to slow the fully loaded dolly over 38 seconds is 12 million. A Saturn V rocket thrust that launches 35 million. Earth's gravitational force on 100 female blue whales. And then force required to slow the fully loaded dolly over 4 seconds, 115 million newtons. Like over three times the amount that the rocket thrust at launch would be. And the force required to slow the fully loaded dolly over 2 seconds would be 230 million newtons. So this was a big collision, even though the thing was going pretty slow. It's going to take a while to do this. Here's a speeded up view of what happened. Let me move this. So you see the ship coming in. This is the same video. I just sped it up by about a factor of 10 or 20. You see some of the truck and stuff getting across the bridge, and here comes another one. They did shut down a lot of the traffic. There were 6 construction workers repairing potholes. And it does look like the ship turned directly into the stanchion. I mean, that's pretty clear. And it fell down, and it didn't fall quite that quickly. So there are a lot of theories. Cyber attack, somebody hacked the ship, caused the power to go out. And all these are plausible explanations. I would just suggest that I was involved in litigation involving some big accidents, train derailments, and that type of thing. And making a conclusion the next day, like some people have, I think is a little bit over the top. You would never do that if you were investigating it. Sometimes it takes years. I mentioned to Brian this morning that, when I would investigate like a train derailment, you would go out and you would search for an expert witness in a case. And it might take you a year to find an expert witness or to find the right guy who had the right knowledge and all this stuff. And the amazing thing about today's world is you can just open your Twitter account and you have 1,000 experts for free. And they're all telling you something different. And I just think I take a little bit longer view on these things. It could be a cyber attack. That is entirely plausible. Very important port. There's a big mess to clean up. They brought in the biggest navigational cranes. So I went on, and so everybody says this is like the 6th busiest port in the United States. Autos, 25% of the biggest port for automobiles coming and going. The 25% of coal comes in and out of this port. Some other things. And nothing's getting in. The bridge is down here in the lower right-hand corner, so nothing's getting in there. But I just want to suggest to you, too, that there are, I looked at the, I looked at the marine traffic map just to say, okay, well, how many ships are really stuck in there? So some of these, the turquoise ones are naval vessels. The green ones are cargo carrying ships, like the Dolly that crashed into this. And here again, here's the Dolly in the middle. And you see there's a ship, a cargo ship there to the left of the Dolly. There's one a little bit further to the left. That they can't get out of the harbor. There's a Coast Guard base with ships. They can't get out of there. There's some naval ships that are pretty important to the U.S. They can't get out. But there are harbor facilities here on the other side of the thing. So if you look today, like for example, I looked this morning, this is about 6 o'clock or 5 or 6 o'clock. You see there are a group of cargo vessels that all say they're heading to Baltimore, but they're not, unless they're going to this place on this side of the bridge, they're not going anywhere. And the question is, how long is this thing going to be out? This is a problem. Remember the Sunshine Skyway Bridge down in Tampa Bay that was struck by a ship? I don't know how long the port will be closed. Some people say it could be 2 weeks. Some people say 30 days. Some people say 60 days. And it's going to cause disruption to supply chains and that sort of thing. But they're rerouting ships already. I've just looked at a couple ships this morning and they were rerouted to Norfolk or to Philadelphia or someplace. And some ships are just going to say, hey, we were going to Baltimore. We're just dropping off the container here in Savannah, Georgia. And you figure out what to do with it. So it's going to be disruptive. It's, by no means is this to be something to be minimized, but it's not, I don't think it's the end of the world yet, unless it would happen on a much bigger scale. Let's see. So, wars and rumors of war. Putin is making a lot of threats. People that are associated with Putin are talking about nuclear war. This is from the Daily Mail this morning or yesterday. He's calling up another 150,000 men for the Russian army. What's he going to do with them? And everybody complains, oh, look, Ukraine is forcibly conscripting men. Well, now Russia's doing it, but I don't think the pro-Russian people are going to say too much about it. Here's a little video from Victor Davis Hanson, who wrote a book called The End of Everything.
There are innumerable ways that civilizations and their peoples can vanish from history. Sometimes natural catastrophes are to blame. Tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, plagues. The moments that have resonated through history are the destructions of countries and cultures by warfare. The brutal fates of Thebes, Carthage, Constantinople, and the Aztecs of Tenochtitlan stand as a warning to the modern world, America included, that it is hardly immune from the tragedies of the past. From the vantage point of the 21st century, the idea of military obliteration can seem impossible. Those before us who faced the end of everything had the same reaction. Technology may have changed, but human nature is no different now than it was years ago. The Thebans, the Carthaginians, the Byzantines, and the Aztecs were annihilated by weapons that are now obsolete. But the agendas of destruction persist to this day, and only the methods of genocide, nuclear, chemical, and biological, are more advanced and at our fingertips. We have much to learn from those who were destroyed by war, particularly because the old mentalities and delusions that doomed them still are very much with us, especially the last thoughts of the slaughtered. It cannot happen here.
Well, that's it. So we'll give Victor Davis Hanson, our guest updater, I don't know if they call it a prize, but designation for the week. This is an article in the Times of London today. deadly data, the U.S. tech giant fighting for Ukraine, a company called Palantir. I've talked about them over the last couple of years, providing a lot of help to Ukraine and fighting off a much bigger, much more well-equipped army. And I don't think it's going to be successful. Ukraine, unfortunately, is pretty much over. But one of the things I think we don't understand is how Putin views this. And this is the head of the Russian Orthodox Church this week came out and said that this is a holy war. And I was sent this by a pastor friend in Ukraine, the impact of the Russian invasion, and this, you can find this online, the impact of the Russian invasion on faith-based communities in Ukraine. And what they found is that there has been a tremendous destruction. In some places there were areas of Ukraine, there were 60 or 70 evangelical churches, and today there are 0. So you need to understand that that's behind a lot of what's going on. Putin views this as the way for Mother Russia and its church, which he views as the container of Christianity for the world, is fighting this. And you may not like me saying that, but I'm just telling you this is the way it is. This is a picture, so going back to the resolution thing, because I'm going to talk a little bit about Russia in just a moment. So this is, you see Biden and Netanyahu. This is Ynet News the other day, Friday in Israel, arm wrestling. And I don't know, Netanyahu this morning had an operation for hernia, so I don't know if he got the hernia in his arm wrestling with Biden, because Biden's much more fit than we think, I guess. But the caption says, politically alert. And it just seems like there's this propaganda war that's going on all the time to get us to think that, well, what you're seeing is not this. Even in Al-Akhbar newspaper says Netanyahu versus Biden, the beginning of a decline. So I disagree with Professor Dershowitz. I do think that this is a big deal. This was also talked about. So we did not veto that resolution that was anti-Israel. To my knowledge, that's only the second time the United States has failed to do this. The first was around Christmas Day, December 24th or 25th of 2016. So let's put that in context. There was another resolution, anti-Israel, related to settlements, presented to the UN. The UN ambassador at that time was a lady named Samantha Power. She had replaced Susan Rice. Trump had won the election in November. Obama was leaving office on January 20th, and a little over 3 weeks before that, this resolution came up, and Samantha Power and the Obama administration said, nope, we're going to abstain. We're going to allow that resolution to pass, just like they did this week. It's the pattern that existed 8 years ago. And my question is, if Trump wins in the fall, I don't know whether he's going to or not, but if he wins, what are they going to do in that 2 months before they leave office? Remember how they all talked about, oh, what's Trump going to do when he's a lame duck? Well, what are you going to do if you're a lame duck? That's even more concerning to me. How many regulations do you think they're going to dump into the Federal Register? And people are going to have to spend days and days and weeks and months and years to get rid of them. Do you think it's possible that they might do that? Somebody said it's probable. That's right. So Samantha Power did this, and if you go back, this is from the Washington Post in 2013, when she was being confirmed as the ambassador to the UN. She had talked back in 2000 or 2002 on a video, a local PBS station in California, about imposing a solution on Israel. And when I was researching this, because we talk about this covenant and the peace and gavar, the word that's used there in Daniel 9:27. And my view is that, I'm not dogmatic about this, that maybe it means we're going to shove a solution down Israel's throat. Now, my question is, whether you agree with me on that or not, is it possible that this could happen in today's world, that the world might decide to shove a solution down Israel's throat? Does it seem like the world is lining up that way? Now, maybe it doesn't work out that way. So this article says, so what actually happened in the interview? The video is embedded above, but it's a bit of a slog, and neither the interviewer nor her subject is particularly clear. It appears, so this is a Washington Post thing trying to clear the way for Samantha Power to be confirmed as the UN ambassador that Obama appointed. They asked her how if she were a presidential advisor and human rights atrocities broke out in Israel-Palestine, how she would advise the president to put a structure in place that monitors the situation where at least one party or another party may be looking like they might be moving toward genocide. That last part is important. The hypothetical she's addressing is about what to do if genocide appears imminent. He's not asking Power, hey, do you think we should invade Israel to impose a two-state solution? Still, even remembering that she was being prompted with an extreme and unlikely worst-case hypothetical, Power's answer was not ideal. We should impose a solution. She's head of the USAID department now. She's still involved in the administration. As I would suggest to you is the guy whose last name, the Big O. We'll call it the Big O. This article on foreign policy, Israel is strategic liability for the United States. That's foreign policy. This is a guy writing this is with the Cato Institute, a left-wing think tank. What do they think? We don't need Israel anymore. They don't do anything good for us. And look at what Israel faces. This is difficult. This is a tunnel system that they had to get rid of in Gaza. It's about 2.5 miles long. And this is a IDF video of what they had to do to destroy that. And we know what happened at Shifa Hospital. This is an article from the Times of London, and I think you should sort of extrapolate this over to Israel with the U.S. policy towards Israel right now. Fear of prosecution years later could get British troops killed. The concern expressed in this article is people are going back after the fact, and they're saying, you troops, you should not have done this. You should be prosecuted for murder. I'm suggesting to you that that's exactly the mindset of people in our current administration vis-a-vis the Israeli Defense Forces. And I hope to, if I remember, I'm supposed to interview General Amir Avivi from the Israeli Defense and Security Forum later today. That should be up tonight or tomorrow. This is troubling. They want to come after IDF soldiers, just like South Africa's doing it. They've said, hey, if you fought for the IDF in Gaza and you come back home, you're going to be arrested. This is also divisive in Israeli politics. Coalition partner of Netanyahu's government. The concern is we don't have enough soldiers, and we need to do something about it. And this is what one of the people in the Orthodox party, ultra-Orthodox party that's in the coalition says if a yeshiva student has to leave the yeshiva to be drafted, for whatever the reason, then we will not stay in the government, said Moshe Roth, a Haredi lawmaker. This is a make it or break it, he said. I also want to bring this up. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit. These are all connected. This is Shiloh. Great drawing from the Armstrong archaeology paper magazine, whatever. And you can see this is ancient Shiloh, and over on the left there in that red area, that's where the tabernacle stood. We've been there. It's a fascinating, the post holes are just the exact size for the tabernacle to have been there. So what did they have this week? They had a Red Heifer conference. In fact, here's a little bit of the video from that.
And not a lot of during this year's past.
So they're talking about the red heifers, and everybody's talking about the red heifers. So let me just suggest to you this. In fact, Hezbollah picked up on it. This is a Hezbollah Telegram channel. Hey, they're having a conference about these red cows. So everybody's speculating, are they going to do it? Have they already done it? I personally have the mind that it's not ready yet. There's some other things that have to come in place. Some people are saying it's going to happen on Passover. It could. All they need is wood and a place on the Mount of Olives, but they have to be careful because they have to, you can't walk over a grave because then you'll be ritually impure, and you can't sacrifice the red heifer. They haven't had a red heifer for 2,000 years, so they have to get somebody who's really ritually pure. And the red heifer, by the way, you read about it in Numbers 19, is a perfect picture of who? Jesus Christ. The perfect sacrifice, who is ritually pure. But there's a lot, like I said, that because it's been so long since they have had the ashes of the red heifer to purify the people to go in and do the sacrifices in the temple and the temple instruments and that sort of thing, they need to find somebody who hasn't really been in contact with a dead body in their life. Like somebody, I think one Jewish commentator that I looked at the other day said, can't be anybody who's ever been in a hospital. They would be ritually impure to perform the sacrifice. For the sacrifice, you don't need an altar. You just need some wood. It's described in Numbers 19. And there are also some Jewish texts that describe things in more detail. I just personally don't think that they're at that point. They have several heifers there. I think they came from Texas. And they currently qualify as pure. They have to be over the age of 2. They have to be in their 3rd year. So they're in their 3rd year. They do qualify age-wise, but there are a lot of other little pieces that need to be put in place. And the Muslims are picking up on this and saying, hey, we don't like this. This is bad. We're not going to stand by. And some are even saying this is the reason that they invaded from Gaza back in October 7th last year. They may just be making that up after the fact, but be that as may, here's a Hezbollah Telegram channel saying, hey, look at what they're doing. They're trying to take over the Temple Mount. This graphic in Jordanian newspaper, I think it was, talked about the Israel-Lebanon border, which is the next area. So I'm going to be interviewing Avraham Levine, another interview with him from Alma Research on, I think that's on Wednesday. It'll be up sometime on Wednesday. I won't stream it live because it's like in the middle of the night because of the time change. But here's a video from JNS. If you watch any video, go to the JNS YouTube channel and watch this video. I'm going to play most of it. It's a joint project of JNS and Alma Research about what will a war in the north look like? What is Israel facing? We have to assess this. Here it is.
The escalation could take a matter of minutes.
Ever since the horrific events of October 7th, Israel has been engaged in a ground offensive in the Gaza Strip with the stated goal of removing the Hamas terrorist organization. But simultaneously, from the northern border, in the last several months, Hezbollah has fired at Israel over 1,000 times, and Israel has been striking back inside Lebanon on a daily basis. But this has also resulted in the displacement of over 60,000 residents in the northern communities and an ever-growing fear that a true war will break out with the north. To get a better understanding of who Hezbollah is, we traveled to the Alma Research and Education Center, an organization that sits right on the northern border and conducts daily research and threat assessments in the region.
Hezbollah is the most professional and the most experienced and the biggest proxy militia of Iran in the Middle East. It has this arsenal of rockets, around 200,000 different types of projectiles, from drones to missiles to rockets to mortars, whatever. This would mean that Hezbollah has the capability to launch thousands of rockets every day.
By their estimations, Hezbollah could launch anywhere from 1,000 to 8,000 rockets a day. They have about 140,000 short-range rockets, 65,000 could get to Haifa, and others could reach Jerusalem and the southern regions. They also have about 10,000 drones.
It's not a conspiracy. All we have to do is to listen to their own words, what they are saying in Arabic, and cross it with the capabilities. And that way, if you have the words and you have the capabilities, eventually there will be a decision. One decision was made in October 7th. I don't know when the second one will be taken. Maybe during Ramadan. Maybe afterwards. I don't know. But for the people who live here, we are no longer willing to take these chances. And I want to show you something that was published a decade ago.
In the video that the Alma Institute obtained, Hezbollah has laid out an almost identical plan to the October 7th massacre. It starts with a barrage of rockets and then a ground invasion that infiltrates Israeli towns and villages across the border. Even before October 7th, activity on the northern border was ramping up, with Hezbollah scouting patrols and new infrastructure being built.
And they're saying very clearly, we are loyal to you, Hussein, we will do the same thing. And then they call death to America, death to Israel. This is in Lebanon. It's the same as the Houthis of Yemen.
We then traveled to the Reichman Institute in Herzliya to visit the International Institute for Counterterrorism. Here we met with researchers to try to understand the big question of what would war in the north truly look like.
I think that the escalation can take a matter of minutes. I believe that once it will start, we will see thousands of rockets. But not only Hezbollah, not only from Lebanon, also from Syria, also from Iraq, also from the Houthis. This is why we are talking about multi-front war.
Almost everyone we spoke to were in agreement about what this might look like and what the major targets would be.
The leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, he presented a map and said, I have rockets that can get to all these places, hospitals, industry, gas rigs, electricity, infrastructures. That's why you see Israel preparing for a few days of dark.
Once you don't have electricity, it's only a matter of hours or days, depends where you don't have water.
80% of the water we consume come from desalination infrastructures.
You don't have water, you don't have sewage.
And this is just the major infrastructure that can be taken out. There are other targets that might pose even larger threats.
In Haifa, there is chemical industry. I can just target these containers of ammonia, and they will create the same effect of a nuclear bomb.
People will stay in the cities, they don't have other choice. We will find the Israeli citizens in shelters, not 5 minutes a day, not 10 minutes a day, not 1 hour a day, but almost all day.
And then there is the ground invasion.
We have the Nukhba, or those units that will try to enter Israel from several places.
And even if there are IDF forces on the border like they are today, to stop them, it still means bitter battles.
They will try to influence the Palestinians, the Israeli Arabs. There is no front in this aspect. Tel Aviv is a front the same like Haifa, like Jerusalem, like Beersheba. And I suppose that within days we will have thousands of casualties.
In total, they estimate the war could be over within 1 week, but the casualties will be in the hundreds of thousands on both sides.
I do believe that the retaliation will be very, very high scale.
Our security strategy was, and thinking and conception of the Israelis, was all about containment. We can live with Hezbollah watching me from the other side of the border, spying on me. We don't want to get into Gaza. We don't want to get into Lebanon. Let's postpone the conflict. Let's postpone the war. We changed. We are no longer willing to sleep next to these monsters because we saw that if you postpone the war, they get stronger.
The American government has suggested multiple diplomatic solutions to move Hezbollah away from northern Israel and to comply with UN Resolution 1701 to keep a military-free zone between Israel and Lebanon. But with the escalation of hostilities, the chances of an agreement are growing dimmer by the day.
I don't see Hezbollah evacuating from South Lebanon. Based on what? Based on their goodwill? It won't happen.
And no one can say for sure if war with the North will break out, but almost every security expert we spoke to said it was not a question of if, it was a question of when.
The situation that was created here in the North is an unbearable situation.
It's impossible that you won't provide your own citizens with the security that you're supposed to provide them. This is the agreement between the citizens and the leaders and the government, isn't it? You must do it.
It's interesting because, you know, the parallels with the U.S. sometimes are kind of interesting because you have a bit of a border problem here. What's that going to how's that going to play out? I don't know. I'm not a prophet. And I know that this sounds very dire for Israel with regard to the situation in the north. They've evacuated these communities along the border. Avraham, who as I said, I'll be interviewing again on Wednesday. He lives a mile or so from the Syrian border in the Golan. Zarit Zahavi, who you saw, the founder of Alma Research, she lives about 2 miles away from the Lebanon border. 60 to 80,000 people have already evacuated. Now that would lessen the casualties, but those people do not live at home. They've left their jobs, their homes. The kids don't have schools. And by the way, in Lebanon, across the border, there's estimated 120,000 Lebanese have left their homes in the south of Lebanon. This is a huge disruption at best. What happens? Now listen, I think God provides, but we also have to think about this sort of on a human level. How is this going to go? I asked Avraham Levine. You can go find the interview on our YouTube channel. I really wish that it had gotten 200,000 views. He was superb, very knowledgeable. And again, we'll ask him some follow-up questions about this particular video on Wednesday. And I would encourage you to watch for that on our YouTube channel. But I said, what happens if this war breaks out in the north? Because we've been talking about kids not having school. He said, no child in Israel will go to school for at least a year. Now, there are big articles in the New York Times this week about the problems caused by the lockdowns that occurred with respect to Charlie Vector 019er and how that's translating into horrible attendance rates in schools across the United States. None of this is very upbeat, I'll admit that. And again, I know that God ultimately has a plan here, but what's the pain, the cost, the urgency of sharing the gospel and everything in the context of this? I mean, I think the answer is pretty clear. That's what needs to be done. So I do not like, by the way, the United States doesn't abstain or abstains on that resolution. Monday afternoon, 1:30 a.m., a major bridge in the United States collapses. Are they connected? Go get Bill Koenig's book, Eye to Eye. I think you'll find out that they are. So there's a great article I would recommend that you read at JNS. I don't have time to go into it today. Hamas attack as a weapon of mass destruction as Iran nuke program advances. They interviewed Yaakov Nagel, who is a former security advisor expert in the Israeli government, and he said, listen, it may be that Hamas in Gaza, the low-level war right now in Lebanon in the north, the problems in the West Bank, and they just interdicted a whole bunch of weapons that were going from Jordan into the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, this week, is to distract Israel while Iran gets its act together and finishes up its nuclear program. And what happens if it finishes its nuclear program? Even if they just have one or two of these things that they can deliver, it's a big game changer. And so what does Israel do? And attacking Iran, and we know there are prophecies in Isaiah 49 that seem to indicate that this happens, but it's not easy logistically. That's why I always talk about logistics. And again, there's God's protection, protective hand, and all of this. I understand that, but I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I'm just saying is we live in a stage where the world could be very disrupted. And what they're finding, though, as Avraham told me in our interview, that Russia is now sort of reasserting itself in Syria along the Golan border to protect its relationship with Iran, because Iran is supplying it with missiles and drones. That's seems to line up with Ezekiel 38 in some respects, does it not? And then there was this, one of the heads of Hamas was in Iran this week, meeting with the Ayatollah, meeting with the foreign minister, Hania. And so Iran supports Hamas. So we know this is going on. But then there was this one article that kind of I think I almost missed it. Russia and Iran build out gas alliance string of new cooperation agreements dated March 27th, 2024. That's Wednesday. So they signed a bunch of agreements to deal with this giant gas field. It's the largest gas field on the planet. It's called the Pars Field, South and North Pars Field, that's jointly owned by Qatar and Iran. And Russia's, I think, taking over the development and getting gas out of that field to sell on the markets. And when that happens, Russia, Iran, and Qatar will control about 60% of the natural gas supply on planet Earth. That is a very important thing that's happening. So I have about 80 more things. I'm going to make one recommendation. There is a guy, I've mentioned him before, Francisco Gil White. He was fired from the University of Pennsylvania, which I think should be like the first thing on your resume. Right. University of Pennsylvania fired me because I told the truth. Hire me. It should be a badge of honor. He has a Substack called The Management of Reality, and he writes these phenomenal articles about the history of the Israel-Hamas Palestinian issue and all of these things. He has one that I saw this week called "Did the U.S. force Israel to cede strategic territory to Iran?" And the answer to that question is yes. And what they're pushing and have been since the Oslo Accords back in the 1990s, under the Clinton administration and the Bush administration before that, to give the Palestinians control of Judea Samaria, which is the high ground in Israel, and strategically very, very significant. And the only conclusion that you can come to after looking at that is they want to get rid of Israel. That would be the ideal situation. Well, then does that not play into Bible prophecy that we've talked about here for years and years and years and years? And you'll see this, you need to watch the propaganda because they're lying about casualty figures. They're now saying more Israeli soldiers have been killed in Gaza than Hamas. The lies are so ridiculous, and I see it all over Twitter, and you'll see it, somebody post this and say, look at what Palestine was like before the Jews got there. Really? Yeah, that's Tel Aviv, Jaffa. Well, this is a picture in 1909 of the founding of Tel Aviv by a group of Jews who've immigrated to what would become Israel. And this picture is taken in the 1950s after Israel became a country. It's all propaganda. It's all nonsense. Our government participates in it. And I am telling you, we are playing with fire. And I do think the time is short. How short, I don't know. I'm 70. You can statistically, probably short for me. But this could erupt into big war very, very quickly. So I'll be interviewing General Miravivi this afternoon, Avraham Levine from Alma Research on Wednesday, and we did a roundtable with Tom Hughes and Britt Gillette and Pete Garcia the other day about war in the North, if you want to check that out. And I wish you would pray for like me and Tom and Pete and Britt and guys who watch this, because I'm tired. I'm not tired of it, but it takes a lot of time to break this down. It's kind of overwhelming. So pray for all of us that are involved in this, that will be rational, thoughtful, and then pray for those of you who comment, that you'll be kind. Sometimes that's not done so. It's amazing to me what people will say on social media. So let's quit. Remember, time is a declining commodity. Freedom is a declining commodity. Put them together, and we have some work to do. So let's pray. Lord, we are so grateful for what we can remember today, the gift of your Son on the cross to save us from our sins. His death, his perfect life, his burial, his resurrection, his ascension to heaven, and the promise that he will come and set up his kingdom where he will rule and reign from Jerusalem. Lord, pray that you will help us to always keep that in mind, and help us to share the gospel with as many people around us in this time as we can. Make their hearts receptive to that, and give us patience as we do that. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.